Brought to you by the Dark Lord himself, Queasy Ali. Atlantis didn't begin with a kingdom. Atlantis began with a decision made by something that wasn't human. They arrived in the late Ice Age, when the coastlines were bigger, the maps were different, and the world still had room for an experiment. In our reconstruction, they weren't gods and they weren't saviors. They were visitors running a controlled ignition, giving humanity a starter spark: geometry, agriculture, navigation, water management, and the one skill that turns tribes into nations: organization. They didn't build everything for us. They taught principles, then watched what we did with them. And that, right there, becomes the most dangerous sentence in the story. Because once you give humans a blueprint, humans will build a machine. And once humans build a machine, they will try to make it stronger. That's the origin of Atlantis in this storyline: not magic, not fantasy, not an underwater fairy tale. Atlantis is the first engineered civilization, created when early humanity stopped surviving day to day and started designing systems that could outlast generations. They chose a place that looked like a signature from space. A natural target that already resembled a planned city before a single stone was moved. The reshot structure. From above, it's a bullseye of concentric rings. In our account, that wasn't just scenery. That was the template. The visitors understood psychology, and they understood symbolism. If you want humans to unite, you give them a center, a sacred geometry, a city that feels like destiny. So in our version, Atlantis is built on the reshot, not because the reshot is artificial, but because the reshot is persuasive. It looks like a capital before it becomes one. That visual authority becomes the seat of control. This is where the Atlantean era really begins. The first city-state that isn't just a settlement, but a system. The capital is ringed by water and land in deliberate tiers, not because it's pretty, but because circles are security, circles are logistics, circles are flow. The outer ring is industry: shipyards, stone yards, workshops, storage, repairs, and the non-stop hum of a place that can build itself faster than time can decay it. The middle rings are civic order, markets, courts, training halls, and the infrastructure that keeps a city from becoming a riot. The inner ring is the core, where the priest engineers live, the ones who keep the measurements, calibrate the harmonics, and guard the knowledge like it's a living thing. In this scenario, Atlantean culture is obsessed with precision. They measure the stars because the stars are time, and time is survival. They measure the earth because the earth is power. And they measure human behavior because human behavior is the only variable that can destroy everything. If you want the long-form backbone of this reshot and Cataclysm Lane, we already built it in the other video we made: Atlantis, the Younger Dryas and the Global Reset, the reshot structure and lost technology. That episode is the steel frame under this story, and now we're turning it into a single, unified narrative. Now we bring in the first receipt that survives into history: Plato. In our reconstruction, Plato isn't the origin of the story. Plato is the echo that made it to paper. He writes about Atlantis as a ringed capital, a maritime empire, a place of metals, canals, and planned design. And the most important part isn't treating him like a court transcript. The important part is that the description reads like a blueprint. The kind of blueprint you'd expect if later people inherited fragments of a real system and then mythologized it. In our account, Plato's chain matters because it gives the story a route. Egypt to Solon to Plato. That matters because Egypt, in this narrative, isn't just a civilization. Egypt is a library built beside a river that never stops. So in this storyline, Plato becomes the doorway. We step through him, not as proof, but as permission to reconstruct. Then we go where the story becomes real enough to hurt. Daily life in Atlantis. Because the best reconstructions don't just throw disasters at you. They make you feel like the world had waked before it died. Atlantis wakes up before sunrise, not because they worship the sun, but because they study it. Their calendars aren't superstition. Their calendars are an early warning system. Their priest engineers train like a hybrid of scientist and monk, practicing geometry the way a musician practices scales, because the city's systems depend on proportion, resonance, and alignment. Kids learn measurement early, not as homework, but as identity. In our version, the visitors taught one lesson above all others: nature is a circuit. Water flows, air flows, heat flows, and if you understand flow, you understand power. So Atlantis becomes a civilization of flow, water channels, irrigation grids, canal locks, and harbor rings that double as defense. You can picture it like a living machine. A city that circulates people, goods, and energy the way a body circulates blood. Their ships aren't just for trade. They're for mapping. Atlantis becomes an empire of routes and nodes, outposts and colonies, not a single city on a pedestal, but a network spread across coastlines that used to exist. Because remember what the Ice Age world looked like. Sea level was lower, and the continents had bigger shelves. In this account, Atlantis thrives in that lost coastal world, building ports on land that now sits underwater like a drowned memory. Day to day, the culture is disciplined but not grim, because Atlantis isn't portrayed as a dystopia here. It's portrayed as the first time humans felt like we were in control of our future. They farm with advanced planning. They store grain like they expect disruption. They build with redundancy, and that is the biggest clue of all, because nobody builds redundancy unless they understand that the sky can turn violent. Then Atlantis becomes too powerful for its own humility. The Power Era. In this scenario, the visitors didn't hand humans a complete machine. They handed humans a principle. Resonance. They showed that the Earth itself can be treated like a tuned instrument. That stone isn't dead material. That geometry isn't decoration. That the right shape in the right place can focus forces you can't see. Atlantis, being Atlantis, turns that principle into infrastructure. They build a planetary scale network, not all at once, but step by step. First local nodes, then regional chains, then an interlinked grid. And that's where the pyramid lane enters this story, because in this version, pyramids aren't tombs. Pyramids are devices. They're nodes, placed where the Earth's properties make them efficient. They're stabilizers, amplifiers, transmitters, and regulators. If you want the deep breakdown of how we treat pyramids as engineered devices in this narrative, we already built that spine in the other video we made, Ancient Egypt or Ancient Engineers? The Tesla Pyramid Connection. This story uses that as a Power Era chapter, not as a separate debate. So what are they powering here? Not iPhones. Not modern electricity. They're powering civilization itself. Clean energy for water movement, for lighting, for controlled environments, for agriculture systems that don't collapse when weather turns unpredictable. And then comes the temptation that the visitors warned about from the beginning. Any system that can transmit energy can also transmit force. Any system that can amplify can also overload. This is where Atlantis makes the choice that triggers the entire Younger Dryas arc inside our scenario. Atlantis decides the system isn't strong enough. Not because it's failing, but because they want more. More output. More reach. More control. In this account, the visitors warn them, not in a religious way, but in a technical way. They say you're pushing resonance beyond safe thresholds. They say amplification creates feedback. They say if you drive the system too hard, it won't just break the machines. It will break the environment the machines are sitting inside. Atlantis argues back, and the argument lasts years, because Atlantis doesn't see itself as reckless. Atlantis sees itself as destined. This is where leadership corruption enters. Pride. Narcissism. The belief that being brilliant makes you immune to consequence. So Atlantis pushes forward anyway. And then the first shock hits. In our reconstruction, the onset of the Younger Dryas is not just climate. It is system failure. A resonance cascade. A chain reaction. A network overload so violent it doesn't just scorch regions. It destabilizes the planet's balance. The atmosphere fills with soot and ash, not because one single cause is the only possibility in the universe, but because a civilization-scale failure can ignite continents when the energy is mismanaged. In this storyline, there are hotspots, concentrated scars, not random, but patterned. Like nodes in a grid that suffered failure at the same time. The world darkens. The temperature crashes. Atlantis doesn't vanish instantly. Atlantis staggers. The capital survives, but the network fractures. Outposts fail. Trade collapses. Harvest cycles break. A civilization built on flow starts losing its flow. This is where the story becomes survival, because once the surface becomes unpredictable, the smartest civilization does what every intelligent species does when it senses extinction. It goes underground. Now we shift into the subterranean chapter, not as a side quest, but as the logical next move. Underground architecture is what you build when you're not hiding from an army. You're hiding from the planet. In this version, the underground world is a global survival response, refuge systems, tunnel networks, ventilation shafts, multi-level chambers designed for long occupancy. They aren't random caves. They're engineered bunkers. If you want the full deep dive tone and global scope of this underground lane, we already carved it into the other video we made, the ancient megastructures that should not exist, but do. Here, we fold that into the storyline as Atlantis adapting to a world that turned hostile. So the first Younger Dryas phase becomes a long emergency period. Around 1200 years of instability. During that time, Atlantis becomes something else. A fractured civilization surviving on fragments. The remaining priest engineers become custodians, and their job changes. They stop being builders of the future and become protectors of what's left. This is where the moral tension grows. Because rebuilding the network is still possible. And the temptation is still there. Atlantis has survivors. Atlantis has knowledge. Atlantis has ego. So they try again. They don't rebuild the system exactly the same. They rebuild it stronger. That's what they call it. Improvement. Progress. Control. But the visitors call it escalation. In our scenario, this becomes the final argument. The visitors don't want to annihilate humanity. They didn't come here to become villains. But they also won't allow the experiment to become something powerful enough to destroy Earth. So they issue an ultimatum. Stop. Or we stop you. Atlantis refuses, not unanimously, but politically. There are factions. There are dissenters. There are priests who want to shut the system down and leadership that wants to dominate. But leadership wins, and the visitors decide the experiment has reached its endpoint. That's where the deal is made. And the deal is brutal, but it's not mindless slaughter. It's controlled reset. In our reconstruction, the visitors offer a compromise. Preserve knowledge. Remove the dangerous core. Leave a remnant of Atlanteans to restart civilization on a safer track, while the rest of humanity on Earth, the hunter-gatherer populations outside Atlantis, continue forward without ever knowing the whole machine existed. Atlantis, desperate to not vanish completely, agrees. This is where Hawara enters the story as the vault, the archive, the operating manual. If you saw the world ending, you'd build a library that the flood can't reach. You'd build a labyrinth that can't be looted easily. You'd build a structure that can survive time's slow violence, the arrow of entropy grinding everything down. If you want the full Hawara spine and why it sits at the end of our Atlantis arc, we already set that foundation in the other video we made, The Labyrinth Under Hawara, Egypt's Atlantis Vault. In this storyline, that episode becomes the final chamber of the account, so the vault is constructed. Not by farmers with simple tools in this narrative. By a civilization still holding fragments of visitor-taught engineering, guided by a priesthood whose only mission is preservation. They build it inland because coastlines are death in a melt era. They build it under the earth because the surface is fragile. And they build it with layers because the best vault is the one you can't understand without a guide. Then we introduce the ring. In our version, the ring is not a metaphor. The ring is a device, a portal mechanism, a gateway, a containment structure, a final exit. Because the visitors' goal isn't to slaughter Atlantis. Their goal is to remove Atlantis from Earth's board. They don't want this civilization rebuilding the grid. They don't want them escalating again. So the ring becomes the evacuation route, and in this account it isn't just leadership that goes. Most of Atlantis goes. The majority of the Atlantean population is taken through the portal, removed from the planet like a dangerous variable being deleted from an equation. Only a small, deliberately chosen remnant is left behind, the ones needed to restart civilization, the ones trained to teach food, time, and rules, but not trained to rebuild the full network. This is where the story gets cold and realistic, because what happens to everyone else? In our scenario, some are taken. Some are left. A remnant remains on Earth by design, because the visitors aren't trying to extinguish humanity. They're trying to remove the catalyst. They leave survivors who don't have the complete operating manual. Survivors who can rebuild civilization, but not the grid. And those survivors become the seed of the reboot. This is where myth is born, because when an advanced group disappears like that, the people left behind explain it the only way humans can. They turn it into sacred story. They turn it into gods. They turn it into warnings. And they carry it forward. The survivors scatter into stable corridors. Rivers. Highlands. Inland basins. They move toward places the flood can't erase easily. And wherever they go, they bring fragments, a calendar, a measuring system, a building technique, a story about the sky burning and the sea rising. This is where we touch the survivor's lane as the bridge between Atlantis and recorded history. If you want the full myth and reboot logic behind this part of the storyline, we built it in the other video we made, The Survivors of Atlantis, Myth, Legends, and Evidence. Here, it becomes the migration chapter that explains why advanced patterns appear like jump cuts across the ancient world. So the survivors teach what you teach in a broken world. Food first. Then time. Then rules. Agriculture, calendar systems, ethics. Because ethics is survival technology after catastrophe. It's the only way to keep a traumatized population from tearing itself apart. This is the part that makes the story feel real. Not the visitors. Not the portal. The psychology. People remember the strangers who helped them rebuild. They remember the ones who carried knowledge through the wreckage. They mythologize them because myth is how you preserve memory when you don't have writing yet. Then we arrive at the final wipe. The end of the Younger Dryas. In our reconstruction, this isn't gentle. It's the closing of the reset. Ice collapses. Meltwater surges. Sea levels rise violently across the world. Coastlines drown. Harbors vanish. Entire shelves disappear under hundreds of feet of ocean. And whatever remains of Atlantis on Earth is erased in the blink of an eye. This is why Atlantis becomes a ghost story. Because the best place to look for an Ice Age civilization is the place we barely explore. Underwater. And underwater doesn't preserve cities cleanly. Underwater breaks things. Buries them. Grinds them down. So what survives? Stone inland. Underground chambers. The vault. And stories. That's it. That's what a reset leaves behind. Atlantis stops being a debate topic inside this storyline. Atlantis becomes the central character, a civilization that touched the edge of a planetary power system, argued with its makers, and then got removed from the board. The ring activates. The core exits. The vault remains sealed. The remnant survives. The planet resets. Then the visitors disappear from open history, not because they don't exist in this narrative, but because their last experiment went sideways. They tried contact. They tried uplift. They tried partnership. And the result was Atlantis. Brilliant. Dangerous. Too ambitious. So they retreat. They watch from a distance, like scientists who refuse to run the same experiment twice. They don't hang out anymore because the last time they did, humans built a power grid and tried to turn it into a crown. Now, here's the closing hit, the reason this story matters even if you treat it as a what if. Civilization is not guaranteed. Time is not a straight line. It's an arrow, and entropy pushes everything toward decay unless intelligence fights back with preservation. That's why the vault matters. That's why the labyrinth matters. That's why the underground matters. Because the real question isn't whether Atlantis was real. The real question is what we would do if the world snapped tomorrow. What we would preserve. What we would lose. And whether our own descendants would remember us as gods, fools, or a warning carved into stone. Atlantis, in this scenario, is not the epilogue. Atlantis is the prologue. And the reboot we call history may just be the aftershock of a world we were never supposed to remember. Kwesi Ali, the man, the myth, the legend. The icon aka the Dark Lord. Hashtag Revolution 2025 Hashtag Chaos Rising 2025 Hashtag South Pole Rebellion 2025 Hashtag Atlantis Reconstruction Hashtag Reshot Structure Hashtag Hawara Labyrinth